Jephthah had a rough start in life. He was always the kid that people would see coming and would suddenly close their mouths and talk to their neighbour behind their palms when he walked past. Two sets of eyes looking at him like he was something that squirmed out from under a rock. Other kids picked up on this, of course, as kids do, and it wasn't too long before they started calling him the son of a whore. Not that they really knew what that was to begin with. Understanding came a bit later on. And the problem was, he couldn't really argue back because he was the son of a whore. Blame his old man for that one. Thanks, Dad, for a lifetime of ridicule. Although his dad at least had the decency to raise him as a son rather than disowning him, I guess. He had a roof over his head. He had food in his stomach. But it just seemed to come with a whole lot of baggage. So Jephthah couldn't argue back, but what he could do is fight back. He was a well-built kid, tall for his age and strong. And the school of hard knocks had taught him that a fast fist could end teasing, at least for a while. He couldn't count the number of arguments that he had nipped in the bud with his fists. Except, of course, for his brothers. Or should he say half-brothers? The actual sons of their dad's actual wife. Jephthah's fists never seemed to end their corrosive taunting. It just kept on coming. We are legit. You never will be, they said. And they never let him forget it. And there came the day many years later when their hostility, which had always been there, turned into an ultimatum. Dad's getting on, Jephthah, but there is no way we are going to share any inheritance with you. You don't belong here, whore's son. If you are around when Dad kicks the bucket, his won't be the only body found on that day. Enough said. So Jephthah, now a young man, strong, tall, packed his few things and journeyed as far away as he could, spitting on his hometown in the hills of Gilead as he left it, swearing never to return. And finally he settled in the region of Tob, far to the northeast and out on the plains. As often happens, bitter and angry men attract other bitter and angry men. And he soon became the leader of a gang. A group of miscreants causing trouble, dealing out harm, and living in the underbelly of life. The good people of Tob would have been wishing for a 501 extradition, but it never came. You see, life can be a hard teacher. And it had taught Jephthah something very, very well. You are nothing to people if you have nothing that they need. You're nothing to people if you have nothing they need. He had had nothing with his brothers, nothing they needed. He had nothing that his hometown had wanted. And he swore to himself that he would never be so powerless again. Scene number 2. Jephthah settled down in Tob. Perhaps he left some of his wild ways behind him a bit. He got married. He had a daughter. And perhaps seeing her grow mellowed him as fatherhood often does. His eyes would crinkle and smile in delight at the funny things that she used to do. Being an only child, she was always the center of attention, and she grew up confident and outgoing. But although softened, he remained a tough fighting man. That was what he was known for, and his reputation spread far and wide. Perhaps a little too far, because one day there came a knock on his door, and he opened it to find the last people he expected or wanted to see. the elders of the region of Gilead, where his hometown was situated. He didn't want to invite them in, but the laws of hospitality are pretty set. And so after the initial welcome and over refreshments, they brought their message to him. Jephthah, our people, your people, are at the mercy of these invaders, these Ammonites. We need you back, Jephthah. You are a natural commander. You're a great fighter. Come and lead our forces. Jephthah snorted. My people? You stopped being my people when you kicked me out and drove me away. But the head elder leaned forward and fixed him with intent eyes. Jephthah, if you do this for us, we will be your people in a whole new way. You will be our leader, and we your humble subjects. Really? Really? For good? Until you die. At last, this was something that Jephthah understood. Because he knew that you are nothing. You are nothing to people if you have nothing they need. But if you have something that people want, then you can deal. And life, as Jephthah understood, was all about the deal. Because you don't get anything for nothing. He'd been conceived through a deal. His dad had handed money over to a woman for sex. He was just an unexpected byproduct of a deal. And the deal had grown to consume his life. It was his mantra. It was his creed. You trade for what you want, and the powerful always get their way. And now God had finally given him something to deal with. A slow smile spread over his face, and he called out to his wife and daughter and his dog, "Get your things together, we're moving town." And he just couldn't wait to see the expressions on his brothers' faces. Scene number 3. The day that the Lord's Spirit came upon him had been filled with frantic preparations. Preparations for war. Troops were running here and there. Men were sharpening their blades, tightening their straps. All around was a slightly manic banter of men who did not know whether they would survive another day or not. Jephthah had tried negotiating with the Ammonite king, but to no gain. So be it. The time for words was over. It was now time for action. Jephthah had been giving orders and conferring with his second in command when suddenly it felt as if he had been plunged, slow motion, into an ice-cold waterfall. A feeling of tingling exhilaration flowed down him from head to toe. A sense of indestructible invigoration consumed him. And the stories of old told him what had just happened. The Spirit of the Lord had come upon him. His mirror might tell him he was only clothed in fighting garb, but every other sense knew better. He was also clothed in the invisible covering of the Spirit of God himself. He felt 10 feet tall. He felt 100 feet tall. Now he knew that God was not only with him, God was guiding him, God would help him in this campaign. And so with a smile, he tightened his belt and yelled out to Abner, his 2IC, "Give the call to the men, mate. We move out now. It's going to be a good day." But riding on his horse at the front of his army some 2 hours later, his confidence had drained away somewhat. He looked around him. He hadn't traveled through these hills for years. And the memories they stirred in him were complicated. Bitter memories, senses of rejection again rose within him. I mean, who was he to be leading this kind of an army? He was the son of a prostitute. He was an outcast. He was the black sheep. He squinted back over the long line of men behind him, now caked in road dust as they jostled along, who were putting their lives in his hands. Who was he to be that man? He felt a fraud. If only they could see what was inside him, they would laugh. He knew he needed some help. And so Jephthah looked up to the sky above the brown hills around him of his homeland. And he fell back on the one thing that he knew to be true, that life is all about deals. And if you have nothing, you are in trouble, but if you have something, then others will come to the table. And he knew in that moment he had to make a deal with God. Life's all about the deal. You're nothing to people if you have nothing they need. He knew what he wanted. Victory at all odds, at any cost. But what did God want? What could he offer God to make him come to the table? Jephthah knew that God had commanded sacrifices of animals in the past, and so he must like those sort of things, right? But this would have to be a doozy of a sacrifice. Something that would really cost Jephthah. A high-value deal required a high-value bargaining chip. It's just the way it was. Maybe his mind went to his pet dog, Jag. He loved that stupid mutt. Every time he came near his home, the silly animal would smell him coming from miles out and would race out of his house to meet him, jumping up in a canine bundle of affection and licking his face. They'd been together for years. He would hate to lose him. But life was about the deal, and if he wanted help from God, he just had to deal for it. And who knows? Maybe the first thing home out from the gate would be a goat. Why not leave the decision up to God? And so that night, after they had stopped, Jephthah, in a quiet place, made his bargain, his deal with God. God, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph, the triumph you give me, it's going to be yours. And I will sacrifice it to you as a burnt offering. God didn't say anything, but he assumed the deal was done. And so Jephthah stood up. He always stood by his deals. The next day, he and his army passed by his new home of Mizpah on the way to face the enemy. And he went to his home to say a quick goodbye to his family. Sure enough, Jag, his dog, came racing out to meet him, jumped all over him in boundless excitement. Jephthah held the dog's head in his two hands and said gravely, "Goodbye, old friend." Then his daughter rushed out to meet him, alerted by Jag's antics. "Dad! Dad's here! Mum! Dad's home!" And his girl ran full speed into his arms and was caught in a giant bear hug. Even though she was now all grown up, some things never changed. His wife came out at a more sedate pace, and he hugged her fiercely also. "We're riding to battle today," he said, "but I needed to come and say goodbye. Also, I want you to do something for me that's very important. Can you do that?" Both women nodded mutely. "Good, okay. The Lord is going to give us victory. But if he chooses not to, the enemy may sweep through here, I want you both to go and stay at your relatives for a while. I will come and get you when it's all over. Okay? Okay. Be safe, dear, his wife said. Okay, Papa, I will miss you, said his daughter with a fierce hug of her own. Scene 4. Some days later, Jephthah and a few others from his army rode back through the hills again towards his hometown of Mizpah. He stretched in his saddle to ease muscles made sore from the long ride after the intense battle with the Ammonites. It had been an overwhelming victory. Jephthah had fought like he had never fought before. It was like everything he did fell perfectly into place. Every decision he made seemed to come up trumps. Every encounter with the Ammonite army had led to victory. It could be nothing other than the hand of God. God had come through for them. He had met his side of the deal, fulfilled his side of the bargain. And now Jephthah knew it was his turn because the life that he lived was all about deals. Abner was riding alongside him and said, "Not long to go now. You must be looking forward to getting home." Jephthah grunted, "Well, it'll be nice to rest up for a while, but I sent the girls to relatives, so they won't be there to meet me." "Just you and Jag then?" "Yeah, something like that," Jephthah said uneasily as he looked at and saw Mizpah appearing in the distance. Before too long, they were walking through the streets of the village. And the group of men were getting smaller and smaller as one by one they peeled off to go to their own homes. And it was a happy scene. All around, women were singing, children were laughing, being thrown up into the air. People were celebrating their nation's victory. But their joy was at odds with the dread in the pit of Jephthah's stomach as he thought about the sacrifice soon to be made and exactly what that sacrifice might be. His group was small now. Most had left, and his house was just around the corner. Strange. Normally by now he would have been ambushed by Jag, tail wagging, tongue flapping. But there was nothing. His house came into view. Still no dog. Still nothing really. And then the sound of music began. A young voice full of delight. Tambourines playing accompaniment in rhythms he knew well. Where was it coming from? A growing alarm inside of him. It seemed to be coming from his home. How? The door to his home opened as if in slow motion. "No!" he screamed. And he jumped down from his horse and ran, racing to stop the inevitable. Only to be met by his daughter. What's she doing here? As she twirled and spun, sang and danced, dressed in her best, smiling in joy and breaking his heart. He sank to his knees and sobbed because he knew that after all, in life and with God, a deal is a deal. It's kind of a tragic story, really, isn't it? It's tragic because I think it was unnecessary. And of course, I've put some artistic creativity and some license into that story just to kind of pad it out. We don't know quite if it worked out that way, but I don't think it was needed. Who says we have to make deals with God? Did God say it? Had God told Jephthah that he required this? Especially when this God had already given him his Holy Spirit, clothed him with power, a clear mark of his benediction, a sheer sign of his favor. Permission had already been given. And if you go back in time to chapter 10 and verse 16, we're told that God was motivated to raise Jephthah up not because of some deal, not because he wanted anything, but because in compassion he could bear Israel's misery no longer. That was the motivation in the heart of God. He didn't need anything. He was reaching out and help to give something that could not be responded to in kind. God didn't want this sacrifice, I don't think. He didn't ask for it. But you know what it tells me? It goes to show the way that we view God will determine the way we act towards God. The way we see him will change and set in motion the way that we relate to him. Does that make sense? If you see God as this, you will respond in kind. If you see God as this, you will respond according to that, because that is your understanding of him. If you see him as someone who makes deals, you will need to come with something in your hand. If you see him as an accuser, if someone sees him as someone quick to point the finger, quick to shine the spotlight on all the areas of failing in their life and taking pleasure from that, then you will come uneasily. You'll come guiltily. If you see God as a joke, you will never take him seriously. If you see him being full of love and compassion, you will come to him with confidence and with ease. You see? If you see God rightly, you will approach him rightly. But if you see him wrongly, then your life and the lives of others around you will be flavored by a wrong response. And so the challenge, I guess, from this story, who is informing your view of God? When you speak to him, who do you see? Can I turn your eyes to Christ on the cross? If you want the clearest view, the most accurate representation, in full HD color of who God is, see Jesus on the cross. And you will not see a God who's a dealer, except maybe that he was dealing for you and not with you. You will see God as he wants to be seen, as a God who gives, not a dealer, but a giver. And if you can take that image and make it the heart of everything you do, and live in light of someone who loves you that much, then you will start to relate to him rightly. Shall we pray? Jesus, you are a revelation. You are a revelation in so many ways. But primarily, you are a revelation of the very character of God. Many of us come to you with a lot of baggage. Life has taught us certain things, Lord. Life's all about the deal, or I'll never be good enough, or I have to prove myself to find worth, or ... But Lord Jesus, on the cross you showed us completely how much you love us. You showed us completely how much our sin cost you to love us. And you showed us completely how willing, how completely willing you were to pay that price. And so, Lord, I simply pray, may that revelation so filter into our hearts and minds that we leave all our baggage behind and say to you, I love you because you first loved us. Fill our hearts and minds with that vision as we go into this week, because it's not just us who needs to hear it.